nuclear security is a priority for the Canadian government. We are committed to working with our allies and partners to prevent nuclear terrorism.
So how do you keep nuclear and radioactive materials out of the wrong hands? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the leaders of 52 other nations gathered in D.C. this week to discuss just how to do that. So-called dirty bombs are weapons that mix conventional explosives with radioactive materials. And security analysts say they're high on the terrorist wish list. Canada played a big role this week and put forward its own initiative. And that's where we begin. The Sunday Scrum freelance columnist Susan Riley and the Globe and Mail's John Ibbotson are in Ottawa. And joining us in Montreal, Martin Patriquin of Maclean's magazine. Hello to you all. Okay, so Marty, what did you make of Canada's role in the summit, and would it really have been any different under the Conservatives?
On the larger question of that, I think it would have been much bigger, much different with the under the Conservatives. If you remember, the Conservatives, especially having to do with Iran, the Conservatives closed the Iran embassy in 2012. And sort of had this policy of disengagement with Iran, saying as long as Iran's behaving the way it is, we're not going to touch them. LPC, the Liberal Party of Canada, and Justin Trudeau are much more in line with what Obama was doing, and that's not really a judgment call. I think there's an argument to be made for both. But as far as Iran is concerned, and as far as nuclear proliferation is concerned, engagement is a two-way street. And the thing with Iran came out and was complaining that it hasn't had the business opportunities and et cetera, since the lifting of the sanctions. Iran is a theocracy, and to come out and blame the great Satan that is the United States of America, or blame Israel for all your problems, doesn't make it for a good business opportunity for that country. And I think for Iran to be fully engaged and to decrease again the threat of nuclear proliferation, we have to get rid of some of that, and that's the larger question, I think.
And Susan, here in Canada, the Harper government moved to phase out the use of highly enriched uranium for medical isotopes. People remember that. What else should Canada be doing to safeguard nuclear technology?
I don't know, whatever $42 million can buy, I guess. That's what Prime Minister Trudeau promised at this summit. It bears remembering that Canada is the largest exporter of uranium in the world, that we have a fair amount of weapons-grade uranium around the country. It's used for peaceful purposes, of course, power generation mostly, and also medical isotopes. But there's always been a lingering concern that some of the storage facilities for the used nuclear waste are not secure, are vulnerable to drone attacks, say, or to terrorist attacks. The response from the nuclear industry has always been, no, these things are bunkers. Everything is absolutely safe. And I'm talking about the more practical threats. There is always the threat of, a dirty bomb getting into the hands of terrorists, which is what this conference focused on. But in terms of our day-to-day threat, probably that is a more lively threat. And I'll just conclude by saying that there are plans to ship some of that radioactive waste for disposal in the United States. That raises a whole other safety issue of how do you ensure that these convoys are not interfered with or attacked.
So, John, before we move on to a general discussion about all of this, do you think that Canada is doing enough to safeguard uranium, to safeguard some of these facilities? Is $42 million enough?
Well, I'm quite confident, completely confident, that the Canadian nuclear industry is able, as it has been since we first began building nuclear reactors, 2 generations ago, to safeguard nuclear waste. In the scale of threats, it's a very, very small, minor threat. The much, much bigger threat is that either North Korea, I don't think Iran is actually the issue, Marty, to be honest, or former Soviet republics that had nuclear weapons or nuclear waste would serve as conduits for nuclear materials to get into the hands of terrorists and create a dirty bomb, which, yes, I mean, I lived in Washington right after 9/11, and if you were living in Washington, you really worried about the fact, or you lived in New York, you worried about the fact that you were at ground zero if somebody got a bomb and they wanted to set it off. That's what we need to worry about. Canada, all the way back to the Second World War, when we decided, A, to participate in nuclear development, and B, not to develop our own nuclear weapons, has been a global leader in the safe use of nuclear technology. After the Second World War, the Canadian government offered to help to decommission nuclear waste from former Soviet republics. The best thing that we can do right now is to work in collective security and to do everything we can and to offer our own services to collect and decommission and dispose of nuclear waste from other countries that lack the means to do it.
And yet, the IAEA has documented about 400 cases of attempted nuclear smuggling since the 1990s, another 700 cases of theft of radioactive material. That sounds like a lot. That sounds like something that we should be worried about. Marty?
I think it is. Regardless, it's always going to be a problem. It's been an existential threat for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been a journalist. There's always the issue of someone getting their hands on this and creating a dirty bomb. I think even before the Islamist threat, there was an issue with that. One of the saving graces is, of course, there's not a ton of this stuff out there, and it's very difficult to steal. The second thing I think is also the complexity to put these bombs together. It's very, very difficult to do so. That isn't to take away from the threat, and obviously if something like this was composed, it would be horrendous. It would have horrendous effects. But again, it's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
Susan or John? Susan?
Well, I would just conclude by saying that with this, as with every terrorist threat that we face, the solution, the only protection is improved intelligence and policing. And so that's why I think any military response, it tends to be futile and often counterproductive. So the more kind of focus, attention, and coordination, that's what this summit was supposed to produce in terms of, increasing our intelligence and increasing policing of these groups, the safer we will all be.
So this, John, is the fourth and final summit of its kind. Why? We should just stop talking about it? Everything's fine now?
No, this was a major priority of President Obama from his first administration, that he wanted the United States to take the lead in fighting, in sort of corralling the potential rogue nuclear waste and getting rid of it. He's been working on it for 8 years. And so this is one of his last year as president summit achievement things. Susan's absolutely right. The big challenge for Canada, the United States, and all the Western nations is to coordinate security, to coordinate intelligence. I can't help being mischievous here. The wonderful Trudeau government whose honeymoon is reaching the point now of they lived happily ever after, it's so popular, has not addressed the question of Bill C-51, the anti-terrorism legislation. And I think one of the reasons that they have not is that bill, as obnoxious as many people see it, is one of the means by which we try to detect attempts at things like this and deter it.
All right. Well, speaking of living happily ever after, we're going to stop you there. But maybe for Justin Trudeau, living happily ever after is doing some yoga. This is the Prime Minister's job. It often involves balancing a lot of things, right? But usually not himself. Check out this 2011 photo of Trudeau doing the peacock yoga pose. It resurfaced earlier this week, and as you might expect, international media quickly snapped it up. Those with longer memories might recall Trudeau's father was a pretty good yogi himself, of course. There's the one-liner that Moore just couldn't resist. Cue the balanced budget jokes. We're back with the Sunday Scrum in a moment on CBC News Network.